Welcome to the Analytics Power Hour. Analytics topics covered conversationally and sometimes with explicit language. Here are your hosts, Mo, Michael, and Tim.
Hello, everyone. It's the Analytics Power Hour. This is episode 197. You know, so much of the time, the limitations we run into as analysts are representing our creativity, not just in our analysis, but in our approach to storytelling and creating a narrative arc to the work we're doing. And on this episode, we're going to take maybe a slight lateral jog into what might seem unrelated at first glance, but could end up being something that future generations of analysts and data scientists might use every day as tools to help stakeholders and business people understand us even better. So put down your Python for a minute and grab your loot of bardic inspiration and your cloak of stealthy approach, and let's go on an adventure into the mists of AI and gaming. Tim, have you ever played D&D?
I've never successfully gotten into it. My 20-year-old has played a decent amount, but I have not.
And I feel like I might know the answer, but Mo, what about you? Have you ever?
It took me a good 10 seconds to be like, wait, what's D&D?
Oh, Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. I got there. So this is impressive.
I did oddly have a whole set of the pewter little figures for D&D, but I never actually played it. Right? That would have been a thing? Would that have been a thing? I had a half dozen? Okay.
Yeah. And I'm Michael, and I have a level 7 half-orc druid named Fulgar the Crystalline, named after Folger's crystals.
Michael, I'm so impressed.
But we needed a DM. I mean, a guest. Someone who could be a guide of sorts on this journey. Well, it just so happens that Hilary Mason is the co-founder and CEO of Hidden Door, a startup that is building a social role-playing experience powered by narrative AI. She was the founder of Fast Forward Labs, which was later acquired by Cloudera, and she's on the board of directors of the Anita Borg Institute for Women in Analytics. She is the co-founder of Hack New York, a nonprofit that mentors the next generation of engineering talent for New York's creative technology community. And today, she is our guest. Welcome to the show, Hilary.
Thank you so much. This is very exciting.
I get really stoked about conversations like this only because I started playing D&D during the pandemic. And as I was looking at your company's website and sort of the things you're working on, I was like, wow, this is right up my alley now. But I think that might be a great place to start, is just talk a little bit about how this all got started. And, you've held a number of data science roles and data science leadership roles, but this is sort of sounds like a little bit of a departure in this new venture. So I'd just be curious, maybe our audience could hear a little bit about that story, and then we can jump into more of the deeper technical stuff as we go.
That sounds great. It's actually not that much of a departure if you go back even further in time. So I grew up as a huge sci-fi nerd, reading endlessly, playing a ton of tabletop RPGs through college and graduate school, and found that it was, the source of some of my more meaningful, social experiences. This idea that you sit around a table with your friends and together you create an adventure in a world that is exciting and interesting and motivating, and that it's really about the creative interplay of having ideas together and making that experience together. And there are all sorts of things you can bring to it, like you can do miniatures, you can cosplay, whatever it is that works for you and your friends. But it's something I've always loved. And so, fast forward now to where we are today. I'm the co-founder of Hidden Door, where we're building that narrative AI machine for playing through any story with your friends in any world. So imagine being able to take the world of a novel you love or a TV show you get really into, and then you can all role play inside of that world together. And there are a bunch of things that bring us here, one of which is that I've had a tremendous personal interest and passion for this domain for pretty much my entire adult life. And on the other side, we also have the technical capability to finally make it feasible to actually facilitate some of these interactions in an automated way, in a way that was completely out of reach even just 5 years ago from a technical point of view. And then to draw on your experience as well, there is a tremendous interest right now in this sort of experience, storytelling experiences, which may have been driven by the pandemic, but has been sustained as people really look for ways to have these sorts of creative social experiences with their friends and their family. So it really is the time for building this.
Well, I think Stranger Things on Netflix also probably helped a lot of us sort of like reconnect with some nostalgia as well.
In a good way and a scary way.
Those of us of a certain age, I guess.
Yeah. You got to remember the 80s, I guess.
I mean, was there like the hidden door from what I understand of what you're building, and even as you're describing it, but it seems like, was there like a creative flash where you said, "Oh, I could do this"? Like, I am intrigued by just the inspiration of. It seems both so ambitious, and then you're also like, but we have the technology to do it. I mean, not to any way. I mean, there's clearly a ton of work to be done, but like, where did that spark come from? Or was there a spark, or did it just slowly build?
And it was a little bit of both, in that this is not my first company, it's the fourth. And so I have a set of things I look for in what I want to work on. I look for something that I'm, very excited about, where there is that sort of step function in a technology that we can now go explore what it means to implement and build products around it. And also, when we started, this was not necessarily going to be a game or even a role-playing game. Like, we started actually looking at applying the tech to things like organizing our personal information. So, we communicate through like email and Slack and the web and text, and we can easily now sort of model that in a way that makes it much easier to retrieve. For a while, I was really stuck on the idea of building a new search engine, because I find that what Google provides these days isn't working for me, and I really want to see information synthesized and summarized given my current knowledge levels, and we should have that. Somebody will build it. There are a few folks trying. And so, my co-founder, Matt, and I spent a while sort of circling around what was personally exciting to us and what was technically possible, and building some prototypes until we hit on something that we found really engaging, that when we tested it, our players found engaging, and then that it also has a few features to it, one of which is that the users or the players are people we want to spend time with. So with all due respect to corporate CIOs and chief data officers, I spent the prior 5 years having a lot of steak dinners, and I'm pretty excited to spend more time with teenagers and folks who like role-playing. Like, those are my people. And then it also has a business model that is not, exploitative or parasitic, one that I can be really proud of. Hey, I grew up in social media years and years ago, so I'm very sensitive to some of those things. And then finally is in that open space where, and I think I already said this, there is that technical jump, and we can invent the product and somebody is going to do it. But now is the time to start to think about what that co-creative experience with the machine learning system can be, and how you can use it to open up these spaces to have different kinds of social experiences with your friends.
Can you really explain to me, you can't kind of keep talking about like this technical jump and like things, there are things that we can do now that we couldn't do 5 years ago, and that you and your co-founder kind of assess these things. Like, what does that mean at like a nitty gritty level? Like, what are the things that you're doing now that weren't possible 5 years ago? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. And on the technical level, it's really the use of things like large language models. And I want to put an asterisk around that, because we need to talk about how those things are used. And then thinking about ways we can do things like text generation and automated, like abstractive summarization as an achievable task, both from a machine learning algorithmic point of view, but also from a like affordability of the compute point of view. And then there's another layer of even having access to sufficient data to start to build models of, not just how is language used in storytelling, but how do plots evolve in different subgenres, and what kind of item would you find in the pocket of the barista, on the starship who's making you your morning coffee, being able to actually inform models that can predict those things. And so, there's that sort of gets to the heart of it.
And it will actually do that. I mean, it will be that if you're in a theme that's a outer space, starship, green aliens, or whatever defines the theme, that it will generate prompts that seem contextually appropriate.
See, I love that you're having trouble even saying the words, and this is something that we've been talking about.
I have trouble saying words all the time. If I could get an AI just to talk for me, that'd be perfect.
But when we think about it as a technical problem, right, we're essentially trying to say it generates things that make sense. What does that mean? And so just to get to the heart of this, like one of the challenges of building a product like this is understanding that there isn't necessarily a notion of quantitative correctness. And so, yes, we are trying to build systems that make things that make sense in context, that people will find to be natural. And that's something that has been really fun to work on as well.
My mind is blowing.
How do you measure?
How do you measure
make sensiness?
Yes, that was straight away. My mind is blown there.
It's how people react and respond to it. So it's a product metrics question, but we do a lot more than that too. And I'm just going to say that one of my hobby horses at the moment is that I think that data people tend to shy away from addressing problems where there is no notion of quantitative correctness. And there are a bunch of them out there, well beyond the stuff we're working on. Even if you think about web search, that is perhaps the canonical problem in which, sure, we have some relatively poor metrics we can try to apply. And then we do a ton of A/B testing when you have a scaled product. But it's hard, right? It's scary. Same for content recommendation, for example. And so you end up falling back to product metrics. So if Netflix, for example, is recommending that you watch a show and you actually watch it, that probably, I don't know anything about their internals, but probably is some signal that they're going to use to reinforce whatever widget or component it was that made that recommendation. But in our case, we look at it, we play test extensively, and then we do things like play 10,000 games with the same probabilistic seeds and see what the distributions of outputs look like and see if there's anything in that looks odd or feels weird.
Because, but I guess that, we'll go YouTube, we'll go with the more parasitic approach where if you're trying to say we want to provide an experience that's engaging and people return to, that's where it seems like the challenge. You want to have an experience that draws them back in, but there's this getting sucked into the horribly unhealthy, which you have kind of very front and center is no, we don't want to do unhealthy, addictive engagement. That seems like providing a really providing a book that I can't put down. That's generally considered a good thing, but in the digital world, a phone that you can't put down is negative. It sounds like that's the needle you're very deliberately trying to thread. I think. Is that fair?
I think so, though. And we would be so lucky as to have the problem of generating stories that you can't put down. And we are certainly aiming at that. Where I think there's a little nuance is whether those stories start to they drive their engagement through things that are damaging to the person consuming them, whether it be, in the case of YouTube, misinformation or gradual extremism. And that's where it becomes really deeply problematic, or, not to just pick on YouTube, but encouraging body image issues in the Instagram posts, right? Those products can be damaging, and you can see how they would get there because they're optimizing for those engagement metrics. And there's, also a ton of research that shows that people tend to engage with things more when they are outrageous or provocative versus things that are sort of calm and, make you feel, a little happy about the world, right? And so it's sort of the combination of those metrics with some of our unfortunate human tendencies that can lead these products to become quite damaging without any product manager ever saying, you know what, I'm going to build a thing that makes kids anorexic or a thing that makes domestic terrorists. Nobody, I believe nobody ever went in with that intention. So yes, we're not doing that. I have to say that very clearly.
But okay, Tim, I need to rewind. Back on the metrics thing. So I understand the relationship to like product metrics, but maybe this is because I don't understand like the detail of the models that you're working with, but like you gave this example of cup of coffee on a spaceship. I'm not going to reference the like actual right terminology there. I'll just say spaceship. It sounds like what you need to test is how normal, insert commas, that is in that one experience. But how do you separate that from like a good overall story or a good overall experience on your platform? Because I'm just making an assumption, right, that you have many, many models doing many, many little things.
That's true, we do. And there are a few things to tease out of that, I think. One of which is something that we should be very clear about, which is that the model itself is not creative. It is essentially a trope machine. It is excellent at recognizing the patterns in similar stories. And I mean patterns in the sense of, the kinds of sentences that are written so we can generate those sentences, but also the plots, the character archetypes, the personalities, the ideas that, like, for, fans of science fiction, that when you have a story on a spaceship, there are things the author doesn't really have to explain, like that you may have an engine that can go faster than light is a trope you can build on as an author. And so these models get to be very good at essentially becoming these trope machines. And so, it's not to say that the stories don't have to be good, though I don't think, they would stand alone as the greatest American novel. We're not going to be winning the Nobel Prize for Literature with what comes out of our system. What they have to be is memorable, but not so memorable that it's chaos. So we think a lot about the tuning of the ratio of surprise and delight with things that you expect to see because of what the tropes would predict. And doing that in the context of the kind of story you want to be playing. So is it a comedic story? Is it a dramatic one? Is it one about, are you role playing in something like a Bridgerton type world where it's about, relationships and social status? Or are you, out there in your traditional fantasy setting, like, whacking the bad guys with a sword to get the treasure? All of these things are possible, but it's really trying to tune that. And also realize that this is a social experience on purpose. You can play it by yourself, but it is really better with friends, because the thing that makes it special is not that we need more stories in the world. Like, you can just go to the internet and it is full of fan fiction. It's wonderful, but we need your story, the one that's meaningful to us, as we're creating it together.
So I'm dying to ask you how you handle, say, like in the fantasy context, magic systems, because a lot of times, like, the stories can be very fluid, but the systems have to be very locked down. You just have to apply. Anyways, that might be a really dumb question. I don't know, but I'm just thinking about it. I was like, how do you handle that?
No, you thinking Brandon Sanderson, or I'm trying to.
Well, So I'm doing a one shot with some friends right now, where we're doing it in the world of one of Brandon Sanderson's novels, the Mistborn series, and
cool.
We're having to make up our own like rules about. Okay, yeah, so sorry for listeners who are not familiar with Brandon Sanderson. A, you should start reading Brandon Sanderson.
You should start reading
awesome
Brandon
author. And B, that's a great series to start with if you're into it. But anyways, the metal, it becomes the basis for their magic system in that particular set of novels. But applying it to our game, we had to create a structure around that.
Right.
Is that a D&D game or some other game?
It's basically, we're making it up as we go along. It's built on the concepts of D&D, but our DM basically has created a layer to support that world.
Okay.
So yeah. But this sounds like a system that would literally build that for you, which is just blowing my mind.
Yeah, so what we're doing in our particular approach is that there is a stats-based system. And, maybe it's, when I put that little asterisk around large language models, we're coming back to it now, because the core problem we're solving is not one of like, put text into a model and get text out, because that's not controllable and it doesn't necessarily follow the laws of physics or the laws of magic for the world you happen to be playing in, whatever those may be. So what we've done instead is essentially cut the problem in half and solve the problem of unstructured input to structure. And then we have a simulation engine and a bunch of like simulator chunks you can throw in and be like, I want this world to have this sort of magic thing and this vocabulary and dressing around it, and it should work this way. And then we take that structure and we render it dynamically in text and art, sort of like a graphic novel that comes together as you play. It's a very different approach than like just putting something into a large language model and taking the output and showing it to people, which, by the way, would lead to awfulness. And so that's how we handle the issues of different worlds having different, like we're playtesting a lot with our superhero world, right? So like there are superpowers and they work a certain way, but a Mistborn world would have a certain kind of magic and a certain currency for that magic. And so you can pull that chunk of simulation in and be like, yes, this one for this experience.
So there is kind of a finite set of those simulation chunks that you can, if I said I wanted to throw some Douglas Adams in with some Isaac Asimov or something, if I wanted to have the rules of robotics in the world. So is that what and that's when you said like you'd run 10,000 simulations with the same seed? Is that saying I want to take some basic simulations and run them and see if it generates things that are different but that make sense?
I mean, that's how we would test it. But yes, so our system, okay, you put in your input. So in this case, we've designed a UX where you throw a few words in and it writes sentences for you. And you go through till you get a sentence that describes your character's intent, we call it. And you can be as lyrical as you like. Or you can just throw a muscle emoji in there and a sunglasses emoji, and it'll be like, cool, you're doing something muscly and sunglasses-y, right? And it'll fill it in for you. And the idea was that you should be able to have your character do whatever you want them to do with like just your thumb as quickly as possible. We take that intent and then we model it into our simulation, which does in fact have a somewhat, it's not finite because of the way it's expressed, but there is an actual manipulation of numbers and stats that happens based on what goes in, the rolling of the virtual dice and what comes out the other side. And then what comes out the other side gets rendered for you in text and art. And so, yes, it is coupling that structure to the sort of language and narrative piece. And it does require, I think it's a much more robust approach for what we're trying to accomplish and the experience we're building, but it does sacrifice things like if you were using a raw language model, you'd be able to say like, and now my orc character like has the baseball card of the person who won the World Series in 1974 and actually get something back, whereas our system will have no notion of what a World Series is. So you sacrifice some of the generalizability in order to create something that is more like a game than just sort of playing with NLP models.
Well, so maybe I don't know if this is a fair question, but I'm curious, like what are when it comes to build versus buy feels like the kind of the crude way to put it, but as you're describing it, there are things that are very much, you've said you have had to, you're building them because they're unique and different, but presumably there's also backbone and stuff that like where does this live? Is this living in some cloud environment? Like what are the pieces that are like, well, yeah, this stuff, the storage is going to be AWS or whatever for like, where are the pieces and what is it that you're doing versus what is it you're like, yeah, this stuff is just run of the mill and we can tap right into existing services?
Yeah, I mean, I am a huge fan of not building anything you cannot build, and like the fewer lines of code we have to maintain, the better for us. And of course, we are building on the shoulders of a ton of amazing open source work and open model work and data that happens to be out there. And then, hacking and making these things work for us. So we have collected a data set of, at this point, millions of stories, including books and also a bunch of just, fiction stories that people have written and put out on the internet. We have our own GPUs. In fact, right behind me is a machine with a GPU I bought from a guy off the internet because it's really hard to actually come by very beefy GPUs these days. where we do a lot of our experimentation and training. And then one thing I didn't mention.
That's like the modern day equivalent of the Pentium 5 under my desk that's running the website. Like that's the...
Well, in these days of being a fully remote company, when my coworkers are actually running big models and I hear the fans spin up, I don't feel so alone in my home office.
Yeah.
It's like the way they keep me company. But one thing we do is push a lot of our intense computation offline. So, while we're giving all our secrets away in terms of our live language generation, we actually do most of our generation offline, generate tens of thousands of candidate sentences for each plot point, and then templatize those. And then at runtime, we rank them and fill them with the stuff in our game at the moment, which is actually how language generation worked before large language models existed, because I'm very old and I built some of those things back in the day. But that actually makes our compute needs in production fairly small. So we're still running on a hosted service called Render, where you just create it. We have a monorepo, you make a YAML file, and then it deploys all your lovely Postgres DBs and services out there. And that's been working great.
So one of the things that I think it was from one of the blog posts from kind of early last year, was you talked about the see yourself, the pushing against stereotypes and lack of diversity. So how, and maybe this is kind of back around to the same sort of question of how do you provide creative freedom without having system biases or other stuff creep in? Like if you're pulling in all of these texts, do you inadvertently wind up with texts that are misogynistic and biased, and they're gonna start pulling you? Like how much do you have to very, very deliberately say, we've got to make sure we're looking out for these things that AI tends to get sucked into?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, because it is a very real danger of building anything with large language models, which are largely trained off, all of the English on the internet, a lot of Reddit. And as you can imagine, anything trained off that data does indeed replicate and even magnify the patterns of, toxic and, really inappropriate communication that we very consciously do not want. And so we've made a few decisions about that, one of which is, the reason we have the architecture I just described to you, where we're not generating text out of a generative model in production. It all happens ahead of time. It gets templatized. A person reads that template and makes sure that it does not contain anything that we would not be proud to put in front of someone. And that doesn't mean that it couldn't end up generating something completely inappropriate, because again, templates get filled with variables, and you don't have complete foresight, but at least we have a layer of protection. We have a bunch of words that are marked in our dictionary as things that will never be expressed. On the other hand, we've made deliberate design decisions around things like gender expressions. When you create a character, you choose their pronouns. Those pronouns are respected throughout. We make sure that they're not tied to the avatar they can have. They're not tied to the roles that they're given. Like, that's all done in a neutral way. Mm. And that's a decision we've made because that's something we're very sensitive to. And we've tried to be consistent in those decisions so that the outputs don't reflect those kinds of biases. And at least in our system, we're building some deliberate product choices to make sure that at least those things that we can think about ahead of time are not being magnified through the models.
It sounds like you have made some very deliberate choices, and there are, I guess, these stopgaps to help. But do you, as a founder, I sometimes feel like getting this right, it just feels like pushing shit uphill. Like, you can have the best stopgaps in the world, right? And something could still go wrong. Is that something that you personally think about, or is it just one of those things that you come to realize you try and put in the best protections you possibly can to make sure that everybody has a good, positive, inclusive experience? And I don't know, is it something that you wrestle with, I guess, is what I'm trying to understand.
Personally, yes. And I also understand that nothing we do technically will perfectly solve these problems, because even if we could solve them technically, there's still issues with things like bullying or inappropriate interactions that can happen, and that might be input and output that is perfectly appropriate in one context, but because of a context that's not even accessible to us, within the application, it's not. And so the way I think about approaching that is that there is always a human layer of moderation and support available to be summoned to interact with the tooling and the power required to be able to handle whatever issues may still arise. And that is a hard-learned lesson from some of my early experiences working on consumer social media.
So there's the human moderation, and then I think now, I think if I'm understanding, when you said like it'll generate say 10,000 templates and those are reviewed and scored, is that humans that are reviewing and scoring it?
We have a person reading every template. The ranking is automated, but none of the templates go into the system without somebody at least reading it.
Okay. And what's the ranking? What's driving? No. It's a complex thing, and we're jumping all over the place. I should have brought an architecture diagram. But that works great in an audio format.
Okay, good point. But if you imagine, let's say we've just taken a turn in the game. We've each decided what our character is going to do. The system has mediated it and said, okay, Tim, you succeed. Hilary, you fail. Here's the consequences of your failure. Here's what happens because of your success. The change in the game state. So the update to the stats behind the thing based on what we've chosen. And then it has to tell us in text, it has to write the bit of the story and pull the art together. And so our system is trying to feel like a graphic novel. So it'll say okay, here's Hilary's avatar falling on her face, and Tim's character's avatar flying into the air with his power succeeding, whatever it may be. And there's a sentence that describes that. And so it takes that structured, essentially, representation of the plot at that moment, and then ranks all of the available text templates that can cover that sentence or two, and then makes a selection based on essentially an arbitrary set of heuristics at this point, which is a nice way of saying we made it up. So we made up a way for what seems good at the time and makes sense. And then it does that rendering and passes it through. And that is, as opposed to some of the other ways you might approach this using large language models, where you would essentially have the model accept your input as a prompt and generate some text that you would then return to the user. But you have no idea what it says. You have no control over it. It may or may not, prompts are suggestions. It may or may not actually do what you want it to do. And it may indeed just say something outrageous. So in our system, what we're trying to do is take essentially a data structure and render that accurately. We are not relying on the language model at that point to tell us, what should happen.
So is GPT-3 a large language model? Is that?
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure. So the human side of it, what's the skill set of both the humans who are reviewing the templates before they go out, as well as the humans who will be pulled in to do the moderating? How do you, it's crazy is not the right word. It's fascinating that this thing is being built, and yet there's a heavy human layer. It sounds awesome that the humans are in the front end as opposed to take Meta, where it's these poor humans who have to sit and slog through all this horrible flagged content. That sounds miserable. This actually sounds like it might be kind of fun and interesting. But what's their background? What's their skill set? What's their role?
I'll actually go up a level with that question, tell you a bit about our team. So our team is a bunch of, I hope this would be a compliment to everybody, but delightful weirdos with a bunch of, everyone has sort of a mix of a creative background as well as whatever their particular skill set is. And we're about half folks from tech broadly, so software engineers, ML people, and half folks from the games industry. So we have a game director who's, very experienced at this stuff, an art director, who's worked on artistic systems and games for kids and cartoons and things like that, and a community manager who has experience in inclusive communities of gamers. And so we're a very small team, so it is still a little bit of everybody who is doing all of both the incredibly exciting generation of 10,000 candidate sentences, and then the slogging through and reading of them. And so that's a shared responsibility. And it is, as we look to build out that moderation team, we look to people who have experience moderating and supporting inclusive communities, who have training in how to handle issues like bullying or, let's say interactions with potentially non-custodial parents, or, issues that can arise in any sort of social forum. And we've also been pretty thoughtful about how people engage in our platform, in the sense that we don't have unmoderated even audio communication. So you're playing together through the game interface, which is mediating what your character is able to do and communicate. So trying to be very thoughtful about all of those things.
Have you found that skill set difficult to hire for? Because I can imagine it's not there's not people coming out of university with experience in tech and then related to, I guess, equality on a platform. I don't know what the right words are for that.
No, it's something I think about a lot, because the answer is no, but we're very small right now. So we're 10 people, and we're, going into early alpha, shortly. And so it's not hard. And I found this actually in every startup I've been involved with. It's not that hard to hire at this scale, because we are looking for the people who don't fit in a box, who have, everyone on the team sort of brings a variety of different experiences and ends up doing a whole bunch of stuff beyond what just their core skill set is. And I very much appreciate that about small teams. I do expect it to be a challenge to hire for when we get to a greater scale.
All right, let's step aside, and you know what it's for. It's for the Conductrix quiz. That's right, the quizzical query, the conundrum that pits our two co-hosts as they go toe-to-toe on your behalf on a quiz question conducted by Conductrix. So let's talk a little bit about Conductrix, because the Analytics Power Hour and the Conductrix quiz are sponsored by Conductrix, and they build industry-leading experimentation software for A/B testing, adaptive optimization, and predictive targeting. Go to conductrix.com to find out more. All right, and I'm super excited to announce Hilary Mason has stayed on to do the quiz with us. So Mo and Hilary, you're a team. Would you like to know who you are competing on behalf of?
Of course.
Definitely.
All right, so Sean McLean, I think you are, sir, in for maybe a win here, because there might be. This is a powerhouse. This is a dream team. I'm telling you, it's a dream team. All right, Tim.
I will appreciate the expectations are set really well in my favor for this.
Tim, you are competing on behalf of listener Juliana Jackson. All right, so let's jump into it. So here is the question, and it's a long one. You open a door and walk into a room that appears to be a reading study. You notice sitting in a corner your friend and Power Hour co-host Michael Helbling, quietly reading an old, frail, small paperback book. As you approach, you try to read the book's title but are unable to. You say hello and then ask about the book. "Oh, this," Michael replies. "It's the original Choose Your Own Adventure book written by Edward Packard. These were really popular with the younger kids back in the 80s. They're fun because the reader is given some control over the flow of the story. In certain sections, you're asked to make a decision that has an associated page number to turn to. This created forks in the story, and it was kind of cool because it made each book a bit like a role-playing game using a simple deterministic decision tree." Today's podcast guest, Hilary Mason, works on AI games and storytelling, so I thought it'd be fun to revisit a super early and extremely simple version of this type of conditional storytelling. Interestingly,
I feel like I already turned to page 12 and drowned in the swamp. But
yeah, that's you have died of dysentery. No. Yeah. Interestingly, while this is technically the first book of its kind, it actually was listed as number 62 in the series. You then say, "Oh, then you must be reading," and now you get to choose your own adventure here. If you say Caves of Time, go to page 10. If you say Sugarcane Island, go to page 20. If you say The Color of Magic, go to page 30. Or if you say So Long and Thanks for All the Fish, go to page 40.
So those are basically our multiple choices?
All right, so I think what we have to do here is determine which page should we be going to, and that would be the correct answer.
I'll start with saying it's not 40 because that's the Douglas Adams So Long and Thanks for All the Fish.
Am I allowed to agree with you? Because I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yes, I think all of us can agree that that's not even close. That is the fourth book in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy trilogy. Yes, you heard me right. Fourth book in that trilogy. It's very important you understand that. So if you chose that one, you would have lost if you're following along at home. Okay, so then we have Caves of Time at page 10, Sugarcane Island at page 20, or The Color of Magic at page 30. Those are our choices.
I have a really strong urge to think that it's Sugarcane Island, and I definitely read those books as a child. I think that's actually
I definitely read them. In fact, when anyone ever talks about what it's like to work at Canva, I'm like, it's a choose your own adventure book. I love those books.
And then they died of dysentery.
It's funny you say that because I also read them, but 80s, right? And my intuition is it's either 10 or 30. I don't know, but I have no reasoning to support it at all.
Do you know, I was leaning towards those two as well, but I have no, I literally have no memory of a single name of a single book, so I don't feel like I'm helped.
Yeah, I wouldn't know either.
I have no idea. If I had to pick one, I'd say it's 10. I think Caves of Time. Like it sounds epic.
What about if each one of us picks one? What is that allowed? Helps?
I think it's totally allowed. You're choosing your own adventure here. So
because then I could pick, because I think 30, and then you could pick 20, Tim, and then whoever wins. I mean, obviously Shane's got better odds.
Yeah, that scenario, Sean, you'd only get half a prize. So just FYI. No, I'm just kidding. All right, so we kind of are doing a little bit of like betting odds now. So we've got coverage on Caves of Time on page 10 and Color of Magic on page 30. And then, Tim, are you doubling down and saying Sugarcane Island?
I'm going to lock in. Yeah.
All right. Da-da-da-doom. Okay, so the answer is page 20. Michael looks surprised. You win! Sugarcane Island was originally written in 1969 and is credited with being the first book of its kind. I can't believe you got that correct. You're even more of a nerd, or should I say quintessential analyst, than I even imagined. Anyways, actually though, Hilary, you were super close because Caves of Time was the first in the Choose Your Own Adventure series, but wasn't actually the first one written.
Oh.
So I think, I feel like you were actually really close. So that was super good. Anyway, thank you both. Congratulations, Juliana. You're a winner because Tim is such a great nerd. Awesome. Thank you to Conductrix for sponsoring the Conductrix quiz. And let's get back to the show.
So, Hilary, I'm not going to lie. I have thought, we have all thought about having you on the show forever. And I did not think this, if I thought about it years ago, this is probably not what I imagined us discussing. But, and I'm actually mind blown away because I can't even fathom how you and your co-founder would sit down and come up with this idea, let alone execute on it. That's the bit to me. When I think about anything to do with NLP, I'm like, that sounds really hard. That sounds impossible. But it seems like you guys ran towards possibly one of the most challenging areas of machine learning. Looking back, I don't know, what do you wish you knew? What have you learned? What would you do differently? I mean, there's 1,000 questions I've got on this.
Well, and it does seem like you kind of just you went in stealth mode. It just was oh, Hillary's working on this new thing. And then it was like, it was a while. I was like, what's she doing? I put my name on the homepage, but yeah, so I'll add on maybe, has it taken longer to get where you're expecting? I mean, I assume it always takes longer than you expected or hoped, but yeah, like how you've gone through this experience before. This seems, boy, really, really different. So has the path gone as you expected? How has it, or how has it not?
I mean, first, it is very exciting to be here. And yes, if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, it would have been very different. And has it taken longer to get? Yeah, it certainly has. And part of it, if I'm allowed to be a human being for a minute, like part of the path has been just like, oh, there's a pandemic, and like, a lot of the things that, at least I was accustomed to doing professionally just sort of like dampened down or changed dramatically. And, we spent about a year just building prototypes and testing them and like trying to understand both at a technical level, like, is the thing we want achievable, but then at an experience level, like, is the thing we think we want to build something people actually enjoy? Like, is it fun? And that's really different than many of the products I worked on before. So, back in 2014, I founded a company called Fast Forward Labs, and it was an independent applied machine learning research and product development group. And we did our own research, which was really cool. And that's really where my interest in modern NLP got started, in that we actually did our first report and prototype on natural language generation. Back in 2014, we did a whole bunch of work on summarization, which remains probably the most fun project, I think, that I worked on doing that company. And then we worked with a whole bunch of clients and partners to build out their machine learning products. And that was everything from like, can we do QA on videos of pizza coming out of a quick service pizza oven, to like robotic surgery, like video analysis, to like customer support via NLP. Again, same technology, very different application, and where some of the liabilities in that context are actually advantages in writing fiction, for example. And I mention that only because there is a thread through all of it that makes sense. And then, again, being a human being with a choice to make, like when I finally moved on from Cloudera and I knew I wanted to build another product, I knew I wanted it to be, again, something with people I wanted to spend time with, something I was personally really passionate and excited about, and also one that's really hard, where, we are able to try to create a new experience around an emerging technical capability. Like, that's just really fun. And it's something that is, I feel incredibly fortunate to even get the chance to do this, and to do it with a team that is so interesting and fun and quirky too, is just really, yes, like that's why.
Do you feel like the traditional gaming companies, Hasbro bought D&D Beyond, are they thinking along these lines too, about how to be, not just take what was traditionally an offline experience and making it, like porting it from, let's make that experience online. Words with Friends is taking Scrabble and putting it online. Are there like the established players? Are they also maybe in different ways, but trying to say, how can we actually make this unique and more engaging or something? Like, is there a lot happening in that space?
There's not as much as I would have thought, and I have a theory about why. So one of the things I've been trying to do is to collect all the cool people thinking specifically about NLP in games. And so if you happen to be one, I would love to know you, and you should send me a note on Twitter or something, and probably we'll have a party or something, or a conference at some point. And there are folks, in academia, there's actually incredibly lively community. And then at the big gaming studios, there is a very active research community, but they seem to be more focused on using machine learning to make the content they're already paying people to create cheaper, which is if I can be slightly critical, is something I saw a lot in my work with sort of the Fortune 500 of the world when I was the GM at Cloudera for the machine learning business, is that it's very easy to get a clear ROI on something when you add a layer of automation, and now it used to cost you so much and now it costs you less than so much, and you're like, cool, I saved this much. Probably not as much as you're paying your machine learning engineers, but like that's another question. But there's not a lot of appetite to try to create the entirely new thing that's now possible because of the automation, if that makes sense. And I've been surprised that I haven't seen too many folks really trying to create new experiences. So a lot of people making better tools for playing traditional D&D online, and that's awesome. And there's a huge hunger for that. But I haven't seen all that much trying to evolve what's possible because of machine learning or AI broadly.
So there's automating the DM and doing the being the DM at scale versus saying, no, I'm going to give you a DM who actually has a much richer world that they can facilitate you creating, and you can pick and guide what that world is, and the DM is able to pull from a vast trove of tropes, I guess, to pull from, maybe. Okay. It's going to get me hooked on gaming.
It's about time, Tim. All right, this pains me because we do have to start to wrap up, but this is so fascinating, and I've sort of been like quiet for most of this episode because I feel like I'll just fully Chris Farley on you and be like, do you remember Settlers of Catan? It's so cool. It's so cool. You know, it's just amazing. Thank you so much, Hilary. It's so cool to have you on.
Well, thank you all. This is really fun.
So one thing we do on the show is we go around the horn and share a last call, something that might be of interest to our audience. So, Hilary, you're our guest. Do you have a last call you'd like to share?
So I think what I'll share then is a book that you will all lose yourselves in for your summer beach reading that sort of goes with the theme of getting lost in a fictional world, and everyone should read it. It's This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. And it is the kind of book that has both, incredible world building, incredible intense character development, some romance, surprising plots. Go pick it up on your summer vacation. You will have zero regrets.
I think I'm going to try it. I'm saying that surprisingly because I don't actually read a lot of sci-fi, but it sounds really good. So but I'm willing to try like any genre. So.
Oh, Mo, we're going to get you hooked.
I know, she's just nudging me in there like one little recommendation at a time.
Sci-fi and fantasy is like the best fiction.
I mean, I was as a child, I was like into sci-fi. It is Michael who like turned me on to John Scalzi, which is like just super quick reads, and I just like devoured his stuff. And then it's like a friend of his who turned me on to Brandon Sanderson. So like my sci-fi and fantasy consumption has gone like through the roof in the last like 6 years. So,
well, they're bringing out obviously of course I can't think of the name of it. The Dragons one, the HBO show.
Game of Thrones?
Game of Thrones, thank you. It's like pulling a complete blank. And also Wheel of Time now. They're doing TV for that too. Okay, Tim, what about you? What's your last call?
So I'm going to do a quick twofer, and they're actually both loosely related to Hilary in different ways. But one, I was talking to Matt Policastro, past guest on the show, and he brought up datakind.org, which I realized from years ago I was vaguely familiar with, but it's kind of like for those of us who are coming from the digital analytics world, it's like Analysis Exchange was, but times like 1,000. So opportunities to volunteer if you're feeling like you're dispirited and disheartened and burned out at your whatever your analytics work and your day job you're getting paid for. DataKind, I've been mulling over what somebody who's a bit of a R-hack with limited skills might be able to contribute to humanity. But I was just looking at their website before when I was coming off my last call, and Hilary, you're like technically on their site as an advisor. So I'm like, of course she's everywhere. So that's one. The other is the Everything is Everything 202 bagel shops in New York City. which I came across through Philip Bump's How to Read This Chart newsletter, but it's kind of also in the spirit of kind of retro things. But these two guys walked the equivalent of 5 marathons every week in New York City, and one of them would regularly order an everything bagel with scallion cream cheese on it, and then he would rate it. So it's about as like low-tech human, totally subjective. And then they built a site where you can kind of explore your area. And I should look up what the top one, he has like the rock star in each one. I'm not sure what Brooklyn, the best in the borough was. And if I'd really been on my game, I wanted to ask my brother-in-law.
See, that as a native New Yorker, the thing about bagels in New York is that they are all good. So like, it doesn't matter. They're all good.
As somebody who grew up in Texas and lives in Columbus, I am like, give me a good bagel, and I don't have a super refined palate. I'm just like, oh my God, a good bagel. I'm a sucker for a good bagel, which was why I got excited about the project. But the old Brooklyn Bagel Shop, are you familiar with that? Ever heard of that? They were rated as the best in the borough for Brooklyn.
All right. We'll have to check it out.
I don't know. But a good bagel, it's kind of a fun little website because it's like data viz overlaid on maps with kind of a retro pixelated like Atari sort of look to it.
Nice. So, all right. Mo, what about you? What's your last call?
So I don't really commute. So I don't listen to a lot of podcasts, which people find particularly strange since I help co-host a podcast. But I had the enjoyable trip on a train this morning and actually decided to listen to a podcast, which I can't believe I didn't listen to Tim earlier. It's really annoying that he is right. And he will have mentioned this as a last call before, but I'm going to repeat it anyway because Tim recommends a lot of shit and you would not be able to do your job if you listened and read everything he suggested. So this is like extra reinforcement. Oh my God, Michael Lewis, I just love the man. Why didn't I love all of his books? I love them. Why wouldn't I have listened to his podcast? Anyway, I'm just completely obsessed with Against the Rules now, and particularly the latest season because it is about experts and I really love it. But the one like epiphany moment I had was in that one particular episode. They're talking about like a specific metric, right? And like people try and boil things down to a specific metric. In the finance world, it's VARs, which is like value at risk or whatever. And it's like intended to be a specific metric to help you understand the risk of an investment, like in a summary. But what often happens when you try and boil everything down to this like one key metric is that it actually takes thought away. And that the point of a key metric like that is that it's actually meant to be the start of another question, not the answer to the question. And I hadn't even had coffee yet. And I was just sitting there being like, oh my God, this is like, we do this in data all the time where we try and come up with like the perfect metric that we can say to the business, like, this is the metric. But the truth of the matter is that should be the start of the conversation, right? It shouldn't be, this is how we're performing against that metric, end of conversation. And that's what we so often do. But anyway, I love Michael Lewis. I could listen to him talk about like toilet paper, I swear. Anyway, Helps, that was a very long-winded last call. I will hand over to you.
It's fine. No problem at all. I love your passion.
What's your last call, Michael?
Well, since I mentioned it earlier, please go check into your local library. And if you haven't yet read any Brandon Sanderson books, if you want to read that series, the book you're looking for is called The Final Empire. So that's book one of a series. So that's the book we were talking about earlier. But if you need to, this is another fun one. If you need to sort of get your YouTube algorithm shook up and changing a little bit for you, I recently came across a YouTube channel and I've been loving all of their videos, which is sort of weird intersection of British people and Korean food, a YouTube channel called Lolly. And it's two British guys, but I think they spent time in Korea, so I'm not sure exactly what their whole thing is, but they end up eating a lot of like Korean food and other kinds of food, introducing people to different kinds of foods. And for whatever reason, I just love that channel. So whenever you need me to get something done and I'm not doing it, I'm probably like watching their old videos. Anyways, that's the YouTube channel that I'm really kind of deep diving on. So if you need your YouTube algo to get like upsettled or whatever, check out Lolly, which is their YouTube channel. Okay, that's it. We would love to hear from you. And you don't even have to be a gamer. You could just be someone who's interested in these kinds of topics and how they work. And the best way to do that is through the Measure Slack, or also on Twitter, or on our LinkedIn. Hilary also is on Twitter. You're actually a pretty big deal on Twitter.
I've just been there a very long time.
Yeah, and your Twitter handle is @hmason, so that's an easy one to find and follow. So that I would encourage everyone to do that as well. And right now, I think Hidden Door is still in early, like, beta or alpha, but there is a sign up. So everybody go sign up and see if you're interesting enough to make the cut to be maybe like one of the early people in there or not. I'm in the midst of the sign up process myself, so we'll see. And I'm like now questioning my choices, and I'm like, maybe that's the wrong games. I shouldn't say that. Anyways, it's okay. We'll get there. Also, no show would be complete without a big shout out to our producer, Josh Crowhurst. Thank you, Josh, for everything you do to help us get the show out the door. Hilary, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the podcast. It's so fascinating to hear what you're building and it's so unique and actually so important, I think. And I think you're building it for the world of games, but I clearly see a future where this kind of idea that you're creating will actually apply in so many different areas. So you said, who's creating the next level of innovation or the next things? You're creating it, I think. So I'm pretty stoked that we get to talk to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. This has been really, really fun.
Yeah. Heading towards that Chris Farley.
Stop it. Just stop. Just stop. Okay. So with that, we'll wrap up the show. It's always a pleasure. And remember, whether you are using natural language processing or just Excel, one thing you can make sure to do, and I know my two co-hosts, Mo and Tim, agree, keep analyzing.
Thanks for listening. Let's keep the conversation going with your comments, suggestions, and questions on Twitter at @AnalyticsHour, on the web at analyticshour.io, our LinkedIn group, and the Measure Chat Slack group. Music for the podcast by Josh Crowhurst.
So smart guys wanted to fit in, so they made up a term called analytics. Analytics don't work.
Analytics. Oh my God. What the fuck does that even mean?
And there's no rules really, so, just do whatever you want.
Other than cheating.
Well, yeah, but who'd know?
No, I just be specific.
I don't think that's what Hilary would do.
I don't feel if any guest was going to cheat, it would ever be Hilary Mason, to be clear.
I'm still not sure what game we're playing, so...
Yeah, that was total trivia.
Okay, yeah. That is the first time we've not had an actual math question.
I know.
I'm now remembering with Hilary Parker, it was like a variance calculation.
It was a calculation that she had memorized at university. Yeah. And I was like, seriously? I didn't
You know the law of Hilarys, like all Hillarys in data science are like super awesome.
They are.
Parker is amazing.
Yeah, we've never gone wrong.
We've never gone wrong with the Hilary. Yeah.
That's right.
Rock Flag and Tropes by NLP. Not my best one. I was struggling.
That was a weird
That'll
one.
be way in the outtakes.